He only stopped to help her fix a broken Mustang. He never expected to find 3 hungry children, or the woman who would quietly change his life. This is a story about kindness in the cold, second chances that bloom like spring after snow, and a secret that turns everything upside down. If you believe in stories that heal the heart and restore your faith in people, make sure to hit subscribe and stay with us to the very end. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's begin. The snow was coming down in thick, wet flakes that made the world feel slower, quieter, like time itself had put on a winter coat. Boone Whitaker squinted through the frosted windshield of his aging Ford F-150 as he pulled into the gas station at the edge of Elk Hollow, Colorado, a forgotten town where the winters bit hard and people held on tighter to what little they had. He cut the engine, the heater coughing one last tired breath. The dashboard clock blinked 7:03 a.m., but it felt much earlier. His son, Miles, was still asleep back at their cabin, curled under 2 quilts and the watchful gaze of an old space heater that Boone prayed wouldn't give up this week. He'd packed Miles's lunch like always, a peanut butter and grape jelly sandwich, cut diagonally, sealed lovingly into a paper bag. It sat on the passenger seat now, looking lonely. Boone stepped out into the cold, the crunch of snow under his boots, the only sound beyond the occasional gust of wind. He was halfway to the pump when he noticed the car, a silver Mustang, engine steaming, hood up, hazards blinking like a heartbeat trying not to quit. A woman stood beside it, hunched into her coat, dark hair soaked at the ends. She held a wrench with shaking hands, staring at the engine like it was a foreign language she used to understand. But what caught Boone's eye wasn't her. It was the 3 small shapes near the vending machines. 3 kids, bundled in mismatched coats and hand-me-down hats, standing shoulder to shoulder like birds on a wire. They weren't moving, just staring through the glass at the snacks inside. They didn't press buttons. They didn't ask for change. They just watched. Boone's chest tightened. He recognized the look, not of hunger alone, but of hope diluted with shame. The kind of hope that doesn't dare speak out loud. He turned back to his truck, pulled open the door, and reached for the paper bag. His fingers lingered on it. It was Miles's lunch, made just the way he liked it. Extra jelly. Crusts cut off. A note inside that simply said, "Love you, kiddo." Boone paused. Then he grabbed the bag. He walked slowly to the kids. The oldest, a girl, maybe 9, noticed him first. She didn't step back, didn't step forward, just held her ground, her little brother's mittened hand in hers. Boone knelt to their eye level and held out the bag, his breath fogging in the air. "This one's got extra jelly," he said gently. "My boy says that makes it magic." The girl blinked fast, her eyes glassy with tears she didn't want to let fall. The youngest, a boy maybe 4 years old, reached out slowly, like the sandwich might disappear. Boone smiled, soft and warm, and let the bag go. "Our dad used to make us these," the girl whispered. "Before he—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Boone stood, heart heavy, but strangely full, and walked toward the Mustang. The woman noticed him now, lowering the wrench like a white flag. "I don't need charity," she said quietly, voice tight. "Good," Boone replied, "'cause I don't have much of it." That earned the faintest curve of a smile. Boone leaned over the engine, eyes scanning. Radiator hose, blown. Battery near dead. She was lucky it hadn't caught fire. He looked at her again, took in the tired eyes, the worn wedding ring she still wore, the way she stood between the car and her children like a shield. "You from around here?" he asked. "Used to be," she said. "Been driving a while." He nodded. "You got a place to stay?" Silence. "We'll figure it out," she said. Boone shook his head slowly. "That engine's done for now, and your kids need more than snack machine glass. I've got space, a warm stove. You can crash in the guest room, just for the night." She hesitated. "I'm Boone," he added, offering a gloved hand. "Jessa," she said after a beat. "Jessa Rowan." He didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, just nodded again and said, "Let's get you all warm." As they loaded the kids into his truck, carefully, gently, Boone felt something he hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Not attraction, not pity, but a subtle shift in the air, like the snow was still falling, but no longer just trying to bury him. The warmth hit Jessa Rowan like a wave when Boone opened the front door to his cabin. It wasn't just the physical heat from the old wood stove rumbling in the corner. It was the way the place smelled of cedar, coffee, and something faintly sweet, like cinnamon and old memories. The cabin was small, clearly lived in, but neat. A pair of boots by the door, a patched couch that had seen better years. On the mantel hung a string of white lights that blinked softly, like the room itself was breathing. Boone waved them in with the casual gesture of a man who didn't overthink kindness. His son, Miles, peeked out from a doorway down the hall, his sandy hair tousled from sleep, holding a model airplane in one hand and looking every bit as surprised as Jessa felt. "We've got company?" he asked, blinking at the cluster of snow-dusted strangers behind his dad. Boone ruffled the boy's hair. "Looks like we do. You mind sharing your space for a bit, buddy?" Miles looked at the three children now clinging to Jessa's legs, Lily, Hazel, and little Finn, and shrugged with a grin that broke the morning's tension like a shaft of light. "As long as they don't touch my plane," Boone chuckled. "Fair enough." He showed Jessa down the short hall to the guest room, a cozy space with a twin bed, a handmade quilt, and a faded painting of a river valley. She didn't speak much as she helped the kids out of their coats and shoes, but her hands trembled when she tucked them into bed, even though it was barely past 8. Boone busied himself in the kitchen, pulling down a pan and heating milk. The silence in the cabin was a different kind of heavy now, not born of fear, but of presence, of two people sharing space without needing to explain themselves yet. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, Jessa looked smaller, not physically, but like a woman who'd spent too long carrying something too big. Boone handed her a mug of warm milk, and she accepted it with both hands, as if afraid it might vanish. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me," Boone replied. "I've had my share of cold days, too." They sat at the small table near the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and relentless. It blanketed the world in white, erasing lines and noise. Inside, the flickering stove painted their faces with amber light. Jessa glanced around the room, then down at her mug. "I didn't mean to put you out. We'll be gone as soon as I figure out the car." "It's not just the car," Boone said gently. Her eyes snapped to his, cautious, on edge. "You and the kids. Looked like you'd been driving a while." Jessa didn't answer at first. She took another sip, watching the snow gather on the windowsill. "We left Illinois 3 weeks ago. I kept thinking we'd figure something out. That I'd figure something out." Boone nodded, not pressing. He'd learned the value of silence. Sometimes a pause was more generous than a question. Jessa let out a breath that seemed to carry more than just air. "I didn't expect Colorado to feel safe." "It's quiet," Boone said. "People don't ask much unless you want to tell." She looked at him then, not just at his face, but into it, searching for the kind of man who would take in 4 strangers without blinking. "Why did you help us?" Boone leaned back, crossed his arms loosely. "Because someone helped me once. A long time ago when Miles was just a baby. I was broke, scared, and stubborn." "What happened?" "A neighbor knocked on my door and handed me a bag of groceries. Said he had too many and thought I could use them. He knew I was proud. Didn't push, just dropped it and walked off. Jessa smiled, small and real. Did you ever tell him how much that meant? Every time I shovel his driveway. They both laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the space like soup on the stove. Boone stood and reached into the pantry. I've got some extra eggs and bacon. You hungry? Jessa hesitated, then nodded. It's been a while since the kids had a hot breakfast. Boone turned toward the stove, but before he could crack the eggs, Jessa said, "That sandwich, the one you gave my son, he didn't say it, but I know he felt seen." Boone didn't answer right away. He just nodded and flipped on the burner. Funny how something that simple can stick. They ate together that morning. Boone, Jessa, and the 5 children crammed around the table with chipped mugs and uneven plates. The conversation was light. Lily showed Miles how to braid string into a bracelet. Finn giggled when Boone made the bacon sizzle talk. Jessa watched them all, her eyes brimming, but holding steady. She didn't cry. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine staying, even if just for one more night. The sun rose late in Elk Hollow, slipping past gray clouds like a tired old man peeking through curtains. Boone stood at the kitchen sink, drying the last of the breakfast dishes with a towel that had seen better days. The smell of bacon still lingered in the air, mingling with wood smoke and the faint, citrusy note of the soap Jessa had used without asking. He didn't mind. The house felt different. Not louder, exactly, though 5 kids under one roof certainly changed the volume. But fuller, less like a waiting room and more like a home that remembered its purpose. From the hallway, Boone heard giggles, light, spontaneous, the kind that only children can produce. He stepped into the living room and stopped in the doorway, unseen for a moment. Miles was on the floor, lying on his stomach, building a track for his toy cars. Lily and Hazel flanked him on either side, helping position the ramps. Finn was trying to drive a car across the rug, making exaggerated engine sounds that ended in dramatic crash noises. None of them noticed Boone. What he did notice was this. Miles was smiling. A real, wide-open, no reservations kind of smile. The kind Boone hadn't seen since his mother passed away. There had been so many quiet dinners, so many unfinished conversations, so many nights where Boone tucked his son in and walked out of the room feeling like he'd left a piece of himself behind. But this morning, watching Miles play and laugh and share, Boone felt something unclench inside his chest. Jessa appeared beside him, her arms crossed loosely, her hair pulled back with a rubber band that looked like it had come from a drawer of lost things. She was barefoot, and her socks didn't match. "He's good with them," she said softly. Boone nodded. "They're good for him. It's been a quiet few years." "You lost your wife?" Boone turned toward her. "Yeah, about 3 years back. Cancer. It came fast. I'm sorry." He didn't say thank you. He just nodded again. They stood in silence, watching the children play. "I used to be afraid of quiet," Jessa said. "Now I'm afraid of noise, the kind that makes people notice us." Boone didn't pry. Instead, he stepped into the room and crouched beside the kids. "What's going on in here? I heard a crash that sounded like someone wrecked my living room." "It was Finn," Hazel said with authority. "But he said sorry." Finn offered a grin of no remorse, then held up a matchbox car with its wheels askew. "It flipped on purpose." Boone took the car, inspected it. "Looks like a stunt vehicle to me. You might have just invented the world's first snowplow racer." The kids erupted in laughter. Even Jessa smiled from the doorway, arms falling to her sides. "You want to help me with lunch?" Boone asked Miles. "PB&J? With extra jelly?" Miles grinned. Boone gave a small wink. "Always." In the kitchen, Boone laid out slices of white bread, the peanut butter jar, and the grape jelly from the back of the fridge. Miles stood on a step stool, sleeves rolled up like a professional. "You know," Miles said. "Lily said they haven't had sandwiches in weeks." "They've had a rough time," Boone replied. Miles spread the peanut butter with more enthusiasm than technique. "I told her jelly makes it magic." Boone's throat tightened. He turned away under the pretense of checking the bread supply. "Is it okay if they stay a little longer?" Miles asked. "Just till their car's fixed?" "I think that's the plan." "Good," Miles said, nodding solemnly. "I think Lily likes being here. I think we're kind of like a pretend family." Boone swallowed hard. "Yeah, maybe we are." They brought the sandwiches out to the living room, where Jessa had helped the kids build a fort out of couch cushions and blankets. The kids crawled inside like it was a sacred temple. Inside, the magic sandwiches disappeared almost instantly. "You okay with this chaos?" Jessa asked Boone, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I'm better than okay." She looked at him for a moment. Not suspicious, not grateful. Just seen. Boone sat across from her, near the fireplace, where the logs crackled and popped like lazy conversation. "I've been thinking about keeping the garage open more hours," he said, "taking on more work." "You run it alone?" "Mostly. I used to have a partner. He moved to Denver." "You ever think about hiring help?" Boone chuckled. "Thought about it every time my back acts up. But it's hard to trust folks with the old ways. Not everything's fixable with a screen and diagnostics." Jessa looked at the kids, their faces sticky with jelly and joy. "Maybe it's not just engines that need fixing." Boone followed her gaze. "Maybe not." That night, after the kids were asleep, Miles curled into his corner of the bunk bed, Lily and Hazel tucked in on the pullout, and Finn snoring in a blanket nest on the rug. Boone and Jessa stood at the back door, mugs of tea in hand. The snow had stopped. The world outside glittered like sugar under moonlight. "They're sleeping like they haven't in weeks," Jessa whispered. "That's what peace does." I forgot what it felt like. Boone didn't reach for her, didn't step closer. He just stood with her in the quiet, in the steadiness of the moment. And for the first time since she'd walked into his life, she didn't feel like she had to run. The snow had stopped for 2 days now. By Colorado standards, that was a small miracle. Boone stood outside the garage with his sleeves rolled up despite the cold, his hands deep in the guts of a '92 Chevy pickup whose engine sounded like it was choking on gravel. Across the road, the sun had managed to stretch itself over the ridge, melting small rivers through the ice on the pavement. Inside the office, Miles sat behind the battered front desk, pencil in hand, diligently scribbling in his notebook. His latest story, something about a dog that could talk and fly airplanes, was already 8 pages long. Lily sat beside him, offering dramatic suggestions. Hazel and Finn were on a mission to count every bolt in Boone's parts drawer. And Jessa was sweeping. She hadn't been asked to. But that morning, she'd walked in quietly, took the broom from the corner, and simply started pushing it across the floor, her eyes low, her movements careful, controlled. Not like she was cleaning something, more like she was holding something back. Boone watched her out of the corner of his eye as he worked. There was a rhythm to the way she moved. Sweep, pause, sweep, that didn't match the silence of the morning. It was like music only she could hear, or perhaps it was the absence of music she missed. She paused by the desk, catching the tail end of Lily's excited explanation about dragon dogs and twin engines. Jessa smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't crinkle. Boone set down his wrench and walked over to where she stood. "You know you don't have to do that, right?" Jessa looked up quickly, as though startled by his voice. "I know, but I need to do something. I don't sit still very well." Boone nodded. "Neither do engines. When they stop moving too long, they freeze up." She gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You ever miss the noise?" she asked, almost absently. "Sometimes," Boone replied. "Then I remember quiet doesn't mean alone." That made her look at him fully. You talk like someone who's done a lot of thinking. You live in the woods with a kid for 3 years. You get used to your own thoughts." She laughed, and for a moment the air lightened. Then the bell above the garage door jingled. It was a soft, forgettable sound, one Boone heard a dozen times a day. But the way Jessa flinched at it made his stomach knot. Her shoulders tensed. The broom slipped from her fingers. She turned, slowly, her face paling by degrees. A man stood in the doorway. He was dressed in business casual, clean wool coat, leather gloves, shoes that didn't belong in a garage. His hair was too neat, his jaw too tight. He scanned the room with a kind of proprietary arrogance, like everything in it was something he could own if he wanted to. "Jessa," he said. Boone stepped forward, instinctively placing himself half a pace in front of her. She didn't speak. "Jessa," the man repeated, sharper now. "You've got people looking for you." The room, just a minute ago filled with children's chatter and metal clinks, went utterly still. Even Finn stopped mid-count and looked up. Boone didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You are?" "Derek Vance. I'm her—" He paused, the word hanging in the air like an accusation. "Former colleague." Jessa found her voice, though it was quiet and strained. "You shouldn't be here." "You left with no warning, Jess. There are legal issues. Investors. Your name is still on. Not anymore," she cut in, her voice steadying. "I signed everything over. You know that. Doesn't matter. There are optics. This." He gestured vaguely at the children in the garage. "This isn't just about you disappearing. You had responsibilities." Boone stepped in then, slow and calm but unmistakably firm. "This is a family business," he said, "and you're standing in it uninvited. I suggest you lower your voice before I help you find the door." Derek looked Boone up and down, the sneer almost automatic. "Do you even know who she is?" "I know enough." Derek exhaled like someone too busy to explain things to simple people. He turned back to Jessa. "The board wants you to return, clean up the mess." "No." "You're not thinking clearly." "No," she said again, louder now. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." Her voice cracked on that last word. Derek's mouth tightened. "You'll regret this." "I already regret too much." She didn't move until the door closed behind him. The jingle of the bell this time sounded like glass shattering in a cathedral. Boone didn't speak. He let her gather herself, let the kids return to their small orbit of play, like nothing had happened. But inside, he knew something had shifted. Jessa sat down heavily on the old metal stool near the workbench, hands clasped in her lap, eyes distant. "I used to have a company," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Real estate tech. We built software for development portfolios. I co-founded it with Derek. And then I walked away." Boone said nothing. "I didn't lose everything in one day. It was slower than that, like drowning an inch at a time." Her fingers trembled. "They only noticed when I left." Boone crouched in front of her, steady and close. "You walked away to protect your kids," she nodded. "Then you didn't run. You chose something better." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "You still want us here?" she asked. Boone didn't hesitate. "I want you safe. That hasn't changed." And for the first time, Jessa breathed, really breathed, like someone who hadn't dared do so in a long, long time. The next morning brought a change in the air, not in the weather, which remained brisk and stubbornly gray, but in something quieter, something internal. Jessa woke up before the kids, the cabin still heavy with sleep. She padded into the kitchen and found Boone already at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "Dreamed about an oil leak that talked back." Jessa smirked, her voice still hushed from mourning. "Nightmares of a mechanic. More like confessions," Boone said. "Coffee?" Please." They drank in silence, the way people do when words feel too heavy for early hours. Jessa looked out the frosted window toward the back of the house, where a narrow strip of land bordered the woods. The snow had begun to melt just enough to reveal the skeleton of a forgotten garden, rows of dead stalks, an old wooden bench, and what looked like the remains of a scarecrow half buried in frost. "That yours?" she asked, pointing with her mug. Boone followed her gaze. "Used to be." "You grow vegetables?" "Used to," he said again. "Back when Miles still liked carrots. Back when I thought things could still grow." Jessa said nothing for a moment, then gently, "Maybe they still can." That afternoon, after the kids were settled with puzzles and old VHS tapes, Boone handed her a pair of worn work gloves and a small shovel. "You sure?" she asked. "You said you needed to move," he replied with a grin. "Weeds need moving. Earth needs waking up." The snow was patchy, the ground below still hard in places, but the sun had made an appearance, timid but hopeful. Together, they worked in companionable silence, digging out the brittle remains of last season's effort. Boone moved with the rhythm of someone who knew the land, slow, steady, purposeful. Jessa, on the other hand, moved like someone unsure if she belonged in this kind of life, but willing to try. "You know," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, "I once had a balcony garden in Chicago. 4 pots, and a basil plant I murdered with kindness. Watered it too much? Spoke to it like it was a board member. It didn't respond well to pressure." Boone laughed, the sound low and grounding. "This dirt here's different. Needs patience, not control. I'm not very good at patience." "You're digging, aren't you?" They shared a smile, soft and sincere. Boone stood, stretched his back, and wiped his hands on his jeans. "We could do raised beds, use some scrap wood from the garage, grow herbs, maybe beans." "And tomatoes?" Jessa asked. "Only if you promise not to give them pep talks." That made her laugh, a real one this time, the kind that crinkles the eyes and lifts the chest. Boone looked at her longer than he meant to. "What?" she asked. He looked down, brushing off his hands again. "Nothing. Just..." Hadn't heard that laugh yet. She looked away, but her cheeks colored faintly. It's been a while. Later that day, while Boone cut old wood into boards, Miles joined him, holding a hammer twice too big for his hands. "You building a real garden?" the boy asked. "We're starting one." "Like, with food?" "That's the goal." Miles nodded like this was a serious endeavor. "I can help. I watched a video once, about compost." Boone handed him a handful of nails. "You're hired." Inside the house, Jessa sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through a worn seed catalog Boone had handed her, like it was a treasure map. Hazel was drawing carrot shapes beside each picture, and Lily had begun writing names for the plants. Tommy the tomato and Benny the basil. Finn simply declared that everything was going to be purple, because purple is the best flavor, and for the first time, it felt like the past wasn't chasing them anymore. They were moving towards something. That evening, Boone grilled cheese sandwiches on the stovetop, while the kids piled books into their fort. Jessa stood beside him, arms crossed loosely, watching him flip the bread with practiced ease. "You ever think about expanding the garage?" she asked. Boone looked up. "What do you mean?" "You've got space, skills. People in town trust you. You could add a second bay, maybe take on apprentices, young guys who need direction." "That's a big leap from rusty Fords." "Maybe," she said, "but you're building more than engines, whether you know it or not." Boone was quiet for a beat. "You think I've got more in me?" "I think you've already proved it. Just maybe you're the last one to notice." He didn't answer right away. The cheese hissed in the pan, golden and bubbling. He flipped the sandwiches, then turned toward her. "You ever think about starting something again? Your way this time." Jessa exhaled slowly. I think about it every time Lily asks me if we're staying. I think about it when I see Finn sleep through the night. I don't know if I have it in me. Boone looked her straight in the eye. From where I'm standing, you've got more in you than most people I've met. They didn't say anything else for a while. They just stood there, side by side, in a house that was no longer quiet in the way that meant lonely, in a home where a garden would grow again. And maybe, just maybe, so would something else. The knock came just after lunch. Boone was out back, sanding the last of the planks for the raised beds, his sleeves rolled up, and a fine coat of sawdust clinging to the hairs on his arms. Miles and Lily were inside arguing playfully over who got to plant the first tomato. Hazel had fallen asleep under the dining table with a crayon still in her hand. Jessa was rinsing dishes when she heard it. Not the bell from the garage, a knock, on the front door, a sound that didn't belong here. Her heart thudded once, hard. She dried her hands on a towel and stepped to the door, glancing over her shoulder as if checking the kids were still safe in their corner of the world. She opened it slowly. The woman on the porch was stunning, in a way that didn't apologize for it. Tailored navy coat, pointed heels dusted with snow, blonde hair swept back with military precision. She held a leather briefcase in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other, like she had never set either down a day in her life. "Jessa Rowan," she said, smiling. "You're a difficult woman to find." Jessa didn't return the smile. "And you are?" "Margot Brennan, senior consultant for Ardent Group. We represent several investment boards, including a few that still have open contracts with Delaney Rowan Properties." Jessa's mouth tightened. "That company no longer exists." "That's technically true," Margot replied smoothly. "But the story doesn't end there. May I come in?" Jessa hesitated. The part of her that had once closed deals in glass towers, who used to command conference rooms, knew this game. She saw the calm confidence, the calibrated tone. She also saw what Margot likely didn't mean to show. Urgency. "Not yet," Jessa said. "Say what you came to say." Margot's smile faltered just slightly, then recovered. "Some very important people believe your departure was premature. There's interest in bringing you back. In fact, there's an offer." She extended a manila envelope. Jessa didn't take it. "You're not hearing me," Jessa said. "I'm done. I walked away. I left everything." "Not everything," Margot said, her eyes drifting toward the noise coming from inside the house. Miles laughing, Boone calling out, the thud of a book hitting the floor. "I read the headlines. I understand why you disappeared. The personal fallout. But people are willing to forget. They need your name attached to a comeback." Jessa felt the heat rise behind her ribs. "They want to use me. Again. They want to restore what you built." "No," Jessa said. "They want to reclaim what they think they lost when I walked out." Margot stepped forward, voice dropping to something more intimate. "You could live well again, Jessa. Power, legacy, control. You had it once. Don't pretend you didn't love it." The front door opened behind them. Boone stood there, holding a wrench in one hand, confusion in his eyes. "Everything okay out here?" Margot turned, already composing the smile she wore like a business card. "Mr. Whitaker, I assume?" "Boone," he corrected. "Boone." She extended a hand he didn't take. "Just a brief visit. I was offering Jessa an opportunity to reclaim her place in the industry. A company like hers. Well, there aren't many who can walk away from that and be invited back." Boone didn't blink. "Seems like she already found her place." Jessa's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "But I'm not interested." Margot studied her a moment longer, then inclined her head. "If you change your mind, your seat's still warm." With that, She turned and walked away, heels clicking against the wooden steps like punctuation marks. Boone watched until her car, a sleek black German import, disappeared down the snow-melted road. He turned to Jessa. "You okay?" Jessa let out a breath. "That depends. On? On whether I just made the biggest mistake of my life or the bravest choice." Boone stepped outside, leaned on the porch railing beside her. "Want my opinion? Not really, but give it to me anyway. You didn't look like a woman trying to run from something. You looked like someone protecting what matters." She stared down at her hands. She was right about one thing. I did love it. The building, the control, the vision. I was good at it. But somewhere in the middle of all that, I stopped recognizing my own reflection. Boone nodded slowly. "Power can be like rust. You don't notice until it's under the paint." Jessa smiled, tired, but soft. "That's poetic for a mechanic. Don't let the flannel fool you." Inside the house, Hazel woke up crying from a nap, calling out for Jessa. She turned without hesitation and went in, scooping the girl into her arms. Boone stayed on the porch, the chill settling into the wood beneath his boots. He watched the spot where Margot had stood and felt the quiet truth of what had just happened. Jessa hadn't just walked away from an offer. She'd defended the life she was starting to believe she deserved. And that, Boone knew, was the kind of strength few people ever recognized in themselves. The house was still. The kids had fallen asleep in a tangle of blankets and limbs on the living room rug, the television flickering through the final frames of an old animated movie. Outside, the night was moonless, the sky a vast blanket of deep blue, and the earth below hushed by a layer of fresh snow that had fallen silently during dinner. Boone stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last dish, while Jessa leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her hair tied back in a loose knot. Her eyes were tired, but not from the kind of exhaustion that sleep could cure. He dried his hands on a towel and nodded toward the back porch. "Want some air?" She hesitated, then followed him. Outside, the cold was bracing, but not cruel. The stars had begun to peek out, tiny and sharp in the navy sky. The porch creaked beneath their steps, the wood groaning like an old man stretching his bones. Boone leaned on the railing, hands stuffed into his coat pockets. Jessa stood beside him, close, but not touching. "You ever feel like your past is right behind you?" she said quietly, waiting to tap you on the shoulder. Boone tilted his head. "Yeah, but these days, I think of it more like a shadow. It's always there, but it doesn't have to lead." She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You make that sound so easy." "Not easy. Just earned." Silence settled between them for a few moments, filled only by the faint hum of wind threading through the pine trees. "You want to know what really happened?" she asked. Boone didn't look at her when he answered. "Only if you want to tell me." Jessa nodded slowly. "I started the company when I was 27, Delaney Rowan Properties. We weren't just flipping homes, we were reshaping city blocks, sustainable design, affordable housing with dignity. And I was good. Really good." Boone listened, his face still, his breath visible in the cold. "But the better I got at growing the company, the worse I got at listening to my instincts. I hired fast, scaled too quickly. Then I trusted the wrong people. Derek, mostly. He was charming, calculated. He handled investors while I dreamed about buildings and communities. I didn't notice how fast he was rewriting the mission until we weren't building homes anymore. We were inflating margins." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "And then? Then came the audit. A whistleblower flagged inconsistencies. There were discrepancies I hadn't caught. Contracts signed under my name that I never saw. Derek insisted it was fine, just noise. But I knew. Did you go public? I tried. But by the time I started asking questions, the board already had their scapegoat picked out. Boone frowned. You. Jessa nodded. The headlines were brutal. They didn't say I was guilty. Just incompetent. Visionary who flew too close to the sun. That one stuck. I was fighting to clear my name and trying to be a mother at the same time. Lily had just started school. Finn was still nursing. Hazel was sick every other week. And I was unraveling. She rubbed her hands together, not from the cold, but from memory. I thought I could salvage it. I thought I could fix it all if I just worked harder, faster. But the harder I pushed, the worse it got. And then one day, I woke up and realized I didn't recognize my life anymore. Or myself. Boone let out a slow breath. So you walked away. I packed the car and drove. No destination, just distance. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my sister. I just left. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, "That must have taken everything." She turned to him, tears catching in her lashes. It felt like failure. It still does. Boone looked at her then. Really looked. Into her. Not just at her. It doesn't look like failure to me. She gave a broken laugh, shaking her head. How can you say that? Because you chose your children over your reputation. You chose to protect them instead of defend yourself in a system that was never built to listen to women who step out of line. Jessa blinked, tears slipping freely now. Boone continued, his voice soft but steady. I've seen people fight for things that don't matter. But you fought for the right thing. That doesn't make you weak, Jessa. That makes you fierce. She reached for the railing to steady herself, but it was Boone's words that caught her. You didn't lose who you are, he said. You just had to bury it for a while. But I see her. The woman who builds things. The one who leads with her heart. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Then, gently, Boone reached out and touched her hand. Not a grab, not a pull, just a simple, quiet connection. She didn't pull away. You still want us here? She asked again, her voice a whisper in the dark. Boone didn't hesitate. I want you where you feel whole. But if that place could be here, then yes, I want you here. Jessa turned toward him fully now, her breath catching. I don't know who I'm going to be next. That's the best part, he said. You get to decide. And as the wind sighed through the trees and the stars blinked down in quiet approval, Jessa finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken beyond repair. She was becoming something new. It snowed again on the morning of December 22nd. Not the punishing kind, but the soft, storybook sort. The kind that fell in slow spirals and caught in children's hair like powdered sugar. The kind that made the world quiet just long enough for something sacred to take root. Inside the Whitaker cabin, the air smelled of cinnamon, pine, and melting butter. Hazel was humming carols she barely knew the words to. Miles was attempting to teach Finn how to fold paper snowflakes, and Boone was setting up the old record player he hadn't used in years, letting Nat King Cole's voice warm the walls. At the kitchen table, Jessa sat with Lily, stringing popcorn onto thread with an intensity usually reserved for closing real estate deals. Her eyes were brighter than they had been in weeks, her posture less guarded. She wore an old flannel shirt Boone had loaned her that hung off her shoulders like a small shrug of safety. Can we get a tree? Hazel asked for the third time that morning, her voice hopeful and small. Boone looked up from the record player, one eyebrow raised. A real tree? Yes, one with lights and everything. We've got a plastic one in the attic, he offered. It's missing a few branches but still stands. Can we get a real one? Lily chimed in, eyes wide. Boone glanced at Jessa. She smiled. Maybe it's time for a new tradition, she said. That afternoon, Boone loaded the kids into the truck. Thermoses of cocoa passed around like sacred relics. They drove a few miles out past the edge of town, where a tree farm sloped gently into a grove of blue spruce. It wasn't crowded, just a few families in snow boots and scarves hunting for the perfect shape. Boone and Jessa trailed the kids as they darted between rows, pointing and debating. Finn declared one tree too pokey. Miles wanted one taller than Boone. Hazel found one and hugged it. "This one feels happy," she said solemnly. "Then that's the one," Jessa replied. Boone sawed it down in 5 quick pulls, hoisting it over his shoulder with a grin that reminded Jessa of something steady, like the feel of strong ground under your feet after a long swim. By nightfall, the tree stood in the corner of the living room, wrapped in strings of mismatched lights. The kids took turns hanging ornaments from Boone's childhood collection: clay snowmen, a crooked star made from popsicle sticks. Jessa added 3 small wooden hearts she'd bought in town that afternoon. "One for each of them," she said quietly. "So they remember this was real." Boone's hand brushed hers when they adjusted the tree skirt. Neither pulled away. Later, after the kids had been tucked into their corners of sleep, the tree still glowing in the dark like a heartbeat, Jessa returned to the kitchen. Boone was already there. He was holding a paper lunch bag. "What's this?" she asked. "A little tradition I started after Lauren died," he said. "Every Christmas Eve, I'd make Miles the same sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly, cut diagonal, bagged, note inside." Jessa's eyes welled. Boone continued. "It was simple, predictable. It reminded us that even if everything else changed, some things could stay." He handed her the bag. She opened it. Inside was a sandwich, yes, but also a folded slip of paper in Boone's clean, blocky handwriting. "This year, the magic came back. You brought it with you." She blinked back tears. "Boone, it's not much," he said. "It's everything." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them then. An unspoken yes. The kind of yes that didn't need celebration, just quiet agreement. The kind of yes that meant, we belong, right here, right now. The next morning, the kids found 6 matching paper bags under the tree. Inside each was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut diagonally, with notes. Miles's said, "The best co-pilots are the ones who never give up." Lily's said, "You are braver than you know." Hazel said, "Magic is real, and so are you." Finn said, "Purple is the best flavor. Never let anyone tell you different." Jessa's said, "Some things can be simple. Some things can be safe. You are both." And Boone's, written in Lily's handwriting, said, "You fixed more than her car." That Christmas was quiet. No big gifts, no grand gestures. Just a family that had once been strangers, now joined by small kindnesses, quiet healing, and one shared belief that the smallest acts, a sandwich, a tree, a name whispered into the dark, could make the world feel whole again. The first week of January came quietly, dusted with wind and white skies that felt like paper waiting to be written on. The holidays had passed without fanfare, but not without meaning. The cabin, once echoing in its quiet, now hummed with a new rhythm. Laughter, soft footsteps, music drifting from the radio, and the sound of things being mended, both inside and out. Boone stood in the garage, hands on his hips, staring at the Mustang. Jessa's Mustang, the one that had stalled on a snowy roadside and carried her entire life in its trunk. It had taken weeks, not because the work was difficult, but because he'd waited until she was ready to face it. Now the car gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its hood lowered, its scars buffed smooth. Boone had replaced the radiator, rebuilt the starter, even stitched the seats with a steadiness that surprised him. He wiped his hands on a rag and turned toward the open doorway where Jessa stood, bundled in a knit sweater and a look that was part disbelief, part awe. "You didn't have to," she began. "I know," Boone said. "But I wanted to." She stepped forward slowly, reaching out to touch the edge of the fender. Her fingers lingered there. "I used to love this car," she said softly. "It was the first thing I ever bought with my own money, before the company, before everything." Boone nodded. "It brought you here. Maybe it still has one more place to take you." Jessa looked at him, something shifting behind her eyes. "That depends. Do I have to drive it away?" "No," Boone said. "But you should drive it." They bundled the kids into the truck and followed behind as Jessa took the wheel. Boone stayed a respectful distance back on the road, watching her through the windshield as the Mustang moved down the street like a story retold with a better ending. She drove to the edge of town and parked beneath a grove of bare-limbed aspens. The air was crisp, the silence almost reverent. "I feel like I'm saying goodbye to someone," she said, as Boone stepped beside her. "Or maybe hello." She smiled, then reached into the glove box. Her fingers brushed something unexpected, an envelope. She frowned and pulled it out. Her name, handwritten, postmarked just before Christmas. "Must have gotten forwarded," she murmured. Boone gave her space as she opened it. Inside was a letter, short and formal, a statement from the board of her former company. Not an invitation, not an apology, just an acknowledgement. "We recognize the integrity of your resignation and acknowledge the mishandling of internal proceedings. If you wish to be involved in the future direction of the organization, the door remains open." Jessa read it twice, then folded it, slowly, and slid it back into the envelope. "They're not asking me to return," she said. "They're offering me ownership." Boone's brows lifted slightly. "What are you going to do?" She stared out across the field, where frost clung to every blade of dormant grass. "I don't want to run it," she said. "But maybe I want to reshape it. Use the resources. Do it right this time, with boundaries, with balance. You could do that from here. Maybe not all of it, but the heart of it, yeah. With the right partners, the right cause." Boone leaned against the car. "Sounds like you've got a plan." "Not yet," she said. "But I have clarity. That's more than I had when I left." They stood there, the Mustang quietly ticking as the engine cooled. "You think it's crazy," she said, watching his expression. "I think it's bold," he said. "But not as bold as walking away with 3 kids and no backup plan. You've done harder things. Why do you believe in me so easily?" Boone looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've seen the way you choose people over pride. That kind of compass doesn't lie." Jessa exhaled, a breath that felt like letting go of everything she'd been holding since Illinois. She turned, opened the door of the Mustang, and reached behind the seat. When she straightened, she held a small metal key. "What's that?" Boone asked. "The spare." She placed it in his palm. "In case I ever forget where home is." That night, the Mustang sat in the driveway, engine cool, headlights off, but it no longer looked like a broken thing. It looked like a survivor, like its purpose had changed. Inside the cabin, Boone brought out a blank notebook and handed it to Jessa. "For the next version of Delaney Rowan," he said. "Only this time, maybe don't put your name on the front." She smiled. "No logo, no spotlight, just roots. And raised beds," he added. "Don't forget those." The kids were already asleep, the house dim except for the soft golden light of the living room lamp. The garden plan sat on the kitchen table, half-colored by Hazel and Finn. Miles had drawn a little mechanic figure in the corner. It had Boone's flannel shirt and a big grin. Jessa reached for Boone's hand. "I don't know what's coming next," she said, "but I want to build it slow, with intention." "That's the only way I know," Boone replied. It was early evening when the newspaper arrived. Boone had never been one to subscribe. Too much noise in most papers, too little truth. But Miles had insisted on signing up for the local delivery because he wanted to read the comics the way his grandpa used to. So, once a week, the El Calo Gazette landed on the porch with a satisfying thump that echoed a little too loudly in the otherwise quiet woods. This week, Boone picked it up on his way in from the garage, wiping his hands on an old rag, half expecting the front page to be the usual: council meetings, high school football stats, a grainy black and white photo of a snow-covered barn. But this time, his breath caught. There, above the fold, was Jessa. Not a stock photo. Not the scandal-frozen headshot that used to follow her name on headlines. This one was recent, her in the garden, taken from a respectful distance by a local photographer. She was crouched beside Lily, both of them laughing at something just out of frame, hands buried in dark soil. The headline read, "From CEO to Community Builder, the quiet comeback of Jessa Rowan." Boone stared at it for a long moment, then slowly folded the paper and tucked it under his arm. He didn't rush inside. He let the moment sit. Inside the house, the air was warm with the scent of soup on the stove. Miles and Hazel were assembling a puzzle on the floor, Finn snoring softly on the couch, and Jessa, her hair pulled into a loose braid, was sipping tea at the kitchen table, cross-checking notes on her notepad with Finn's nap schedule, garden layout sketches, and some rough plans for a non-profit initiative she hadn't yet named. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. Boone didn't say anything right away, just walked over, unfolded the paper, and placed it gently in front of her. Jessa's eyes locked onto the photo first, then the headline. She didn't speak. Not at first. Her hand drifted toward the image, fingers resting on it like she was steadying herself. "I didn't know they were writing this," she said quietly. "It's not what they used to say," Boone replied, "but it's what's true." Her throat tightened. He saw it. The way her jaw tensed, her shoulders lifted slightly as if bracing for a wave that never came. "They got it right," she whispered. "They saw who I am now." "No," Boone said. "They saw what we already knew." She looked up at him, tears welling, not from sadness, but from recognition, from relief. "Thank you," she said. Boone shook his head. "You did this." That night, after the kids were asleep, Boone walked out onto the porch and screwed in a new bulb over the door. The old one had flickered for weeks. He'd ignored it. Too busy, too distracted. But now, with spring just visible on the horizon and a family asleep behind him, he twisted in a fresh, golden light and watched it glow to life. Soft, steady, constant. He didn't tell Jessa about it right away, but she noticed. The next night, and the one after that, she'd pause at the porch before going inside. She'd look up at that light, no words spoken, and just breathe. It wasn't a grand gesture, not diamonds or promises wrapped in ribbons, but for a woman who had been chased, judged, and forgotten in too many lights that burned too harsh or too short, this one was perfect. It simply stayed on. A few days later, a letter arrived, not from lawyers or investors, but from a mother in Boulder. She had read the article. She had 2 kids. She had once owned a flower shop before life bent her sideways. She wrote, "I saw myself in you, and it reminded me that it's never too late to be brave again." Jessa read the letter twice, then posted it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a heart. "That," she said to Boone, "is why I'm going to build something again. I figured you would, but not the way I used to. This time, it's going to grow like a garden, slowly, with people, with care. With compost," Boone added with a grin. "Exactly." Later that week, she printed her first mission statement. Boone helped her file the paperwork. Lily drew a logo in crayon, 3 leaves, 1 for each child. Miles named the organization the Second Soil Project. Jessa cried when she read it out loud, and every evening after the dishes were done and the puzzle pieces tucked back into their box, Boone would step outside, glance at the quiet stretch of woods behind the house, and switch on the porch light. Sometimes it flickered, sometimes it buzzed, but it always came back on. It was more than a bulb. It was a signal, a promise, that no matter how long the road had been, no matter how dark it once got, there would always be one small, warm light left on, waiting. Spring arrived slowly, the way it always did in Colorado, testing the ground with soft rains, flirting with sunlight, then vanishing again behind one last flurry of snow. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt welcome. Boone stood at the edge of the garden, squinting down at the neat rows of raised beds. The wood was worn but sturdy, the soil dark and turned, and tiny green things were beginning to break through. He didn't know their names, not all of them, but he knew they were growing. Behind him, the cabin hummed with life. Lily and Hazel were painting small rocks to line the garden paths. Miles was reading aloud to Finn from a book about planets and dreams. And Jessa was kneeling in the dirt, humming softly as she tucked seedlings into the earth, like secrets only she and the soil shared. Boone watched her for a long time. She no longer moved like someone waiting to leave. She moved like someone who had arrived. That afternoon, they held a gathering. It wasn't a grand thing. No invitations or decorations beyond what the kids made with string and marker. But word had spread through Elk Hollow that something good had grown up at the edge of the woods, and neighbors started arriving with casseroles, seed packets, and stories. The new community initiative, the Second Soil Project, launched quietly that day. No speeches, no ribbon cutting, just a whiteboard set against the side of the garage with 3 handwritten words: grow, nourish, begin again. Boone grilled hot dogs on an old charcoal barrel, while Jessa introduced neighbors to one another, like a woman who knew people didn't just need help, they needed connection. At one point, Boone looked over and saw Jessa sitting beneath the porch light, now glowing even in daylight, her head tilted back in laughter as Lily braided wild flowers into her hair. Her eyes were bright, her body relaxed. She looked 10 years younger, or maybe just lighter. As dusk fell, the party waned. The neighbors left in 2s and 3s, waving over shoulders, leaving behind empty casserole dishes and promises to come back. The kids fell asleep in a pile of sun-tired limbs on the living room rug. Boone stood beside Jessa on the porch. Neither of them spoke. They just watched the light settle over the land they'd tended together. "You know," Boone said after a while, "when you first showed up, I thought maybe you were just passing through." "I thought so too," she replied. "But you stayed. Because you left the light on." Boone smiled. "I didn't know what I was waiting for." Jessa turned toward him, her voice quieter now. "Boone, I don't need big declarations. I've had enough of those. What I need is a place to be real, to fail, to grow." He nodded. "You have that here. And you?" "Same." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the key, the spare Mustang key he'd held onto all this time. She placed it in his hand. "It's not a goodbye," she said. "It's just a way back, in case either of us forgets where this all began." "The car?" "The kindness," she said. "The sandwich. The light." They stood like that for a long time, hands clasped, futures shared in silence. Then Jessa leaned forward, just enough to rest her forehead against his. Not a kiss. Not yet. But something quieter, deeper. The kind of closeness that didn't need to be chased. It had simply arrived, like spring, "We're not broken people," she whispered. "No," Boone said. "We're rebuilt, like the Mustang." Later that night, Boone walked the house, checking the doors, tucking blankets around sleepy kids, setting a kettle on the stove for the next morning. Jessa stayed on the porch, her eyes raised to the stars. When Boone finally stepped outside to join her, she looked at him, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with certainty. "I'm home," she said. He didn't answer with words. He reached up and turned on the porch light, just in case. In the months that followed, the second soil project grew beyond Elk Hollow, not into cities or stock listings, but into neighboring towns, into schools, into women's shelters and community gardens, where healing took root with hands in the dirt and sandwiches packed with jelly and care. No one remembered Jessa Rowan as the CEO who vanished. They remembered her as the woman who stayed. And Boone, he just kept building things, mostly with his hands, sometimes with his heart. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across miles, seasons, and stories. It's always a joy to see how far these moments can travel. And if this story touched you in any way, we'd be truly grateful if you'd consider subscribing. No pressure, just a quiet invitation to stay with us, so you don't miss the next chapter of heart, hope, and healing. Thank you, truly, for spending your time here. In a world that moves so fast, we're honored that you chose to slow down with us, even just for a little while.